Hey, how's it going? It's Peter from the film scoring department. Let's take a minute to talk about workflow in film scoring, specifically when you have multiple cues and one movie. So, we're going to talk about how you set up separate DAW files for each cue, and then how in the end you bring them all back together for a dub. We're also going to talk about how you can properly export those cues to show them to a director. So, technical note, I'm going to work in Logic 10.4.6 for this, but the basic principle of this workflow would just apply similarly to any DAW. Okay, so things you're going to need in addition to the DAW. You need to have a movie to score, and that movie should have timecode burned in on the screen. And let's take a look at that right now. So I have a QuickTime movie here of an action scene. Things I need from there. I need to know the frames per second or frame rate. So if you're using QuickTime Player, Window and Show Inspector. And we can see right here that there is FPS, that stands for frames per second. In this clip, it's 29.98. You're probably working with a different clip, and this could be a different frame rate. And have a look above that. You'll also see the sample rate of the audio from this movie file. In my case, 44.1K. Yours could be different. Other stuff we need from the movie. Well, we need to know the time that this particular file starts. That is the movie start time. So I've rewound to the beginning, and you can see here in my timecode burn-in, it's 1 hour, 3 minutes, 57 seconds, and 22 frames. 01, 03, 57, 22. Of course, your movie's different. Second thing I need to know, the start time of each cue. So let's say the start of my first cue is up here. Let me go a little farther ahead here to where the action actually starts. How about here? 1:04:04:09. So I'll take a note of that as the start of 1M1. And then I have another cue that starts a little later after that. So let me jump up to where the second cue starts. And this one's going to be an overlapping cue. This is a cue that starts somewhere before the end of the first cue, and they overlap. So I'm going to fast forward ahead and get this number. So let's say that my second cue, 1M2, is going to start here, 01, 04, 31, 10. So that's all the information that I need from this movie right now, and I can jump into Logic and start to build separate Logic files for each cue. Right. So I've launched the Logic application, and I can choose from the File menu, New from Template, or Command N. And this dialog box actually has a little details caret here I can flip down to get a couple settings in. We already know the sample rate. We just got that from the QuickTime movie. So let's set that correctly. And in my project, it's 44.1. Yours might be different. And I know in my project, the frame rate is 2997, that's the same thing as 2998. Your project might be different. Just a couple of things to set. You could set a tempo while you're in here, or a key if you need to. Then we can close that and say choose. And we get a blank project here. It's asking if we need to add any tracks. And actually, let's go ahead and add a couple of audio tracks. We'll come back to these audio tracks in a second. All right, I just want to get a couple of settings in here. Take a look up at the LCD display. We can fix this so that it shows time code. The little caret to the right of it is a place where we can select custom. That looks a little better. By the way, mine shows 4 numbers hour, minute, second, frame. And if yours has an extra set of numbers at the end, the subframe, we can fix that. Logic Pro, Preferences, Display, and then down here near the bottom, third one up from the bottom, Display Time as SMPTE EBU without subframes. And while we're in settings here, click on the Advanced button and make sure you have all this stuff checked. Now let's go ahead and rename these audio tracks. MXA, and MXB. Okay, now I can import my movie. File, Movie, Open Movie. I get a dialog box that asks me if I want to open the movie and extract the audio track. And yes, extract the audio track brings the dialogue or sound effects into this file so that I can later on be able to do a little bit of mixing. Okay, you're going to notice a problem right away. You see how the time code in my movie file is a little different than the time code up there in Logic? That means we're out of sync. We have to fix this right away. Control click on the movie itself. Movie Project Settings. Here's a dialog box where we can give Logic some information about what we're doing. Now, we took a note of the movie start time when we got started with this. So we should type that in. 1:03 57 22. That's different than the movie you're working with. That's my movie. And then File, Project Settings, Synchronization. Measure 1 starts at 1:03 57 22. Now we're in sync. Save. And Save As. And we're going to use this as the template to make the first cue, 1M1. Let's just change the name. So it says 1M1 in the beginning, and save it to the same place. Okay, finally we're at the first cue, 1M1. And we can just get this thing set to the right start time for that music start and get the track layout to something usable to what we need. So we made a note when we first opened the movie of what the start time was for 1M1, which is 1:04:04:09 on my movie. So let me get that punched in. File, Project Settings, Synchronization. And down here, the second one from the bottom, bar position of bar 1, beat 1, and then you type in the number where the music is supposed to start. 1:04:04:09. After you type it in, make sure you hit the return key on your computer keyboard so that it actually sets that number in there. Then you can close this window. You see we're still in sync. The time code here in my movie matches the time code above in Logic's counter. If that somehow didn't go right, go back and fix it. It's easier to get it now fixed. And having done that, we can get rid of this MXA and MXB tracks. These are only useful for the dub. So I selected them, I hit the delete key. Track, new tracks. And we're back to this dialog box. And you could add anything you're going to need for your film. Think generally. Think, what will I need for every cue or for most cues? So, I don't know. I'm just going to pick some things here. Software instrument. Let me make, I don't know. I'll just type in the number 5 tracks here. I'm going to make 5 tracks, and they're all going to be a sampler. Where's the sampler? Sampler. Create. Okay, so I have a basic layout. I could pick instruments. I could do all that. I'm going to skip over it now for the sake of brevity with us. Because what I want to move on to now, having done this, I have a cue where I can work here in 1M1, but I want to keep doing this for every cue that I'm going to need for the film, building this blank template, each with its correct start time. Let me just quickly do one more cue. I'll do 1M2 so that you kind of see the repeat of this, and then we'll talk after that about how after I've scored everything, how I can bring it all back together in a dub. Okay, save this, then save as, change the name to the next cue number, 1M2, save, and now repeat the synchronization setting. I know that the start time for 1M2 is 1:04:31:10. File, project settings, synchronization, 1:04:31:10. Make sure you hit the return key on the keyboard to lock that in. Close the window, check your sync. See if the number here in the movie matches the number up in Logic. And now I have 1M2 done. So let me just save this. I have a dub file. I have 2 different cue files. Each all have the correct start time and the movie, and they have the tracks they need. So I can compose, and I can compose in any order. I can start right here at 1M2 and jump around. I could start from the beginning of the movie and work it out. I'm going to skip over some of that now and come back with you in a second when I have it all composed. All right, now I've composed the music for my whole film. Each cue is in a separate file, and earlier I made a dub file. But before I get into exporting the audio from each of these and combining them in a dub file, let's just look at a case where maybe I have to export one cue, including the movie and my music, to show it to a director for approval. Let's just look at that real quick. So I have 1M1 open right here. Before I export or bounce the audio, I might want to add to the timeline a little section of the movie that starts before the music starts so that the director could look at this in a context of seeing the whole scene. And Logic allows us a simple tool for that. If you look at the top to the left of the measure numbers up there, there's a little triangle. You can hover over it and get this bracket handle. And if you click there and drag to the left, it allows you to pull out a section of timeline that includes negative numbers of the bar. And so now you can actually export not just the section that has music, but the preceding section too. And you can even select the cycle selector, the yellow bar at the top near the numbers, and select how much you want to bounce out of here. I'm going to select all the way past the end of the cue here. So if I were going to export a movie now for the director to see it, having done that, I would go to File, Movie, Export Audio to Movie, pick a name, pick a location. I'll save it to the folder that I'm working on the whole thing in. When you hit save, you get this other little dialog box, and you have an option to check a box here and check a box there, but uncheck both of them. These have to do with the dialog track, which you've already imported. Hit OK. Now you have a movie bounced out. Now let's go back to the case where we've finished composing every cue. And what we want to do is bounce out each of those mixes and assemble them in a dub file so that we can go to the dub stage and deliver the entire movie. Let's talk about what the advantages are of having done the whole thing this way, where we've broken it into separate sections. For one, just like in the case that I did here, this allows us to have overlapping cues. It keeps the file size of each cue under control. This allows for like a really easy navigation going from the beginning and the end of each cue, which is a short timeline of either some seconds or minutes. And allows different instrumentation between cues. Using this system, we can easily insert cues between the cues that we originally planned. And this allows us to change tempos from cue to cue without entirely disrupting the location of the cues that follow it. Along the same lines, this allows us to conform each cue to picture changes without disrupting things down the line. And lastly, this is going to allow us to manage multiple versions of each cue. A couple of disadvantages. This does require having a spotting session before you start scoring so that you know how many cues there are and where they are. And another thing is that this takes a little more time when you're switching between one cue and another for the samples to load. Okay, let's get right back to it. I've navigated back to 1M1. Before I export, I'm going to make sure I've muted the dialogue track, make sure my click is muted, select along the top there, make sure the whole cue is selected, just music. I can jump to the mix window, make any last adjustments I need, and then select the bounce button on the master track. Got a few settings I can choose here. Choose PCM if you want the highest quality. I have, you can see that the measure numbers are already selected because I did that in the cycle selector at the top of the track. I'm using wave files for this project in 24-bit. I'm going to hit OK. It asks me to name it and where to put it. I'm putting it in the bounces folder. It's named BM1M1. Off we go. There's a mix. Navigate to the next cue, 1M2. Make sure you've muted the dialogue track, mute the clicks. Check in the mix window if there's anything you need to do. Hit the bounce button on the master track. Make settings. Hit OK. Rename it if you need to the cue number. Hit bounce, and then continue that way all the way through. You just go through and bounce out any cues that you need to bring to the dub. Now we can open the dub project. In Logic, we can close these. We don't need these for the time being. We are back in the dub window, and we should navigate to the Finder to find these mixes we just made. Have them in the bounce folder here, 1M1, 1M2. I'll take 1M1 and just drag it anywhere into the Music A track, MXA. I can actually give this another color if I like, for organizational purposes. Make this one a yellow file, easy to see. And also from that Finder window, let's grab 1M2 and put it anywhere in the MXB track. We'll give this a separate color too, so it looks nice. How about purple? Okay. Now finally, these are not in the correct place that they need to be for a dub. They are supposed to overlap, but they haven't gone to their appropriate start place. So I can control click on the file, choose the move option, and then choose move to recorded position. And it jumps to a start. That's 1M1's correct start. 1M2 is supposed to overlap later on. Move to recorded position, and now 1M2 is properly overlapping. And you'd continue this way throughout the entire file, 1M1, 1M2, 1M3, 1M4. And you could bring this to the dub. You could export all the audio as one big mix. You could export it with the movie if you want to watch the whole movie all together with it, or watch it right here in Logic.